Normally, that is the first question when I'm a guest on a podcast is how do you pronounce your name? I usually give a brief tutorial on how to pronounce it for people who look at it.
Well, you do have one of those names where Hooked on Phonics doesn't always necessarily do it. There's a lot of letters in that thing.
There are, and there aren't a whole lot of vowels. I mean, when people look at my last name, which begins TCH, they're like, can I buy a vowel, please?
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Whoa, your chair.
It's an old chair.
Is it going to fall?
No, it reclines.
Oh.
It's on a spring.
That's intentional?
Mm-hmm. That is my grandfather's desk chair that he used when he was a teacher back in like the 50s in Nashville.
Wow. I mean, it's still holding up.
Yeah. It's a solid chair.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
They don't make them like that anymore.
People or chairs. Hey, everybody. It's episode 16 of What We Really Want. The best parts of God, the worst parts of me. Greg here with Bobby this morning. Good morning, Bobby.
Good morning, Greg.
Do you ever notice yourself having conversations about your story? Do you ever find yourself still feeling nervous when talking about this stuff?
Absolutely.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. Especially like somebody newer and they ask me like, well, what do I do? Like for my job. And I'm always like trying to read them. Like, do I throw out the word addiction? Do I throw out the word sex addiction?
Pornography?
Pornography. Like how far am I pushing it? And so, yeah.
Is it because you know that based on whatever you say next, the conversation might take a turn?
Yes. Well, and I mean, I think part of me is, I think I'm just sensitive to other people's like being uncomfortable.
Which is good, right?
Yeah.
To be sensitive towards that. Do you ever feel like our sensitivity caters too much to it?
Probably.
Like by being too sensitive and like, oh, well, I think this might make them feel uncomfortable, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Right.
That we're actually not really helping. I just think about that when I think about Tullian, Tchividjian, whose interview we're going to hear in a couple of minutes, because he's one of those people that is very polarizing. I mean, people have very strong opinions about him. He was a very high-profile pastor and has somewhat of a prominent pedigree, being the grandson of Billy Graham. He wrote several books and really was a very loud grace proponent. And there were people that didn't like that. It kind of blows my mind now because of what we've walked through. How can a Christian not like a message about grace?
Yeah.
It just seems like there are a lot of people who are very, very uncomfortable with the message of sanctification through grace.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
It just seems too easy. You know, it's like, how could it be free? How could it be grace? We have to do something.
Yeah. We're really doing a good job in the church of preaching justification by grace, but then it was sanctification by works. You know, once we're in the family, now becoming more like Jesus becomes my job, and you got to work your butt off to do that job well.
Yeah.
And it just seems so wrong to me to discourage that kind of honesty. Well, I feel the same way about Tullian because, you know, he got lambasted for some of the things that he said. But then after Tullian failed, it was amazing to me to see people coming out of the woodwork and almost like celebrating his fall. Like, why would we do that? Oh, you see this whole grace thing? That doesn't work. Like, why would we want it to not work? You know? And so in coming out of that, and in the subsequent years, because Tullian's big blow up in his life that caused him to lose his job and have a lot of brokenness that had been a part of his life come out publicly, happened in 2015. And in the 9 years since then, there's been an awful lot of bumpy road healing, but healing nevertheless. And then about 5 years ago, he was part of planning a new church in Jupiter, Florida called The Sanctuary. There are a lot of people who criticized him like, you shouldn't ever pastor again. And the thing that I love about Tullian is he he will engage the people who like kind of troll him on social media. I don't know if you've ever like read it, but he's definitely got a personality that kind of pokes those bears. And I think that he does it on purpose, in some cases. And I'm not sure why, but I think maybe part of it might be because these are things we need to be talking about, which kind of gets back to the question I asked you at the beginning. Do you ever get nervous talking openly about stuff like this?
Yeah.
And I think it's normal that we do because, like you said, we don't really know where the people are all the time that we're talking to or if they're going to be warm or friendly to this. But I think it's important that we try it anyway.
Yeah.
So when you go ahead and put it out there, is there a thing that usually happens?
I would say most of the time people are just like, oh, okay. And that's it.
I don't want to talk about this anymore.
But it also leads to some pretty awesome conversations when the person wants to engage it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think that's what it's about. Like some awesome conversations when the person wants to engage it. Because whatever you said help them to know, like, when you're ready, I'm the kind of person you want to talk to about this.
Yeah. There's a place that you can come to when things finally blow up and you're ready to talk.
Yeah. And in terms of like the type of criticism that Tullian and people like that get, I love the way that he just leans into it and sort of takes the ammo out of their guns, because he'll respond with the bingo retort, which is whenever the criticism comes and they say, well, you do this and you do that. And he'll like, bingo. And by the way, I do a lot more and a lot worse than that. So like, do you want to talk about this too?
Yeah.
It's like you're taking the wind out of the criticism sails. The reason why sanctification by grace works is because I am exhibit A day after day of why I can't do it. To me, it's just a big comfort to know that not only what brought me into relationship with Jesus was grace, but what makes me in my daily life look more like Jesus is also grace. So this is going to be a long conversation. This is a longer than usual episode. I asked Tullian to tell his story, which he outlines very detailed in his newest book, Carnage and Grace, which came out in the spring of 2024. He talks about what happened when his life blew up, how he handled it at the time, and he's very honest about how poorly he handled it, what life has been like since then. I ask a pretty direct question, how do you know even now when you write a book like this that your motives are good in doing it? And you're going to love what his answer is there. We talked about what he would like to see change and how the church walks with broken people. He shares about his own recovery community. And we talk a little bit about how you choose the people who you're going to really confide and share your full story with. So whatever you think about Tullian or about the method of putting your stuff out there the way that he does, I would just encourage you to kind of listen with curiosity and openness. This is a raw, wide-ranging conversation with someone who understands carnage and I believe really understands grace. This is Tullian Tchividjian, episode 16, The Best Parts of God, the Worst Parts of Me. Tullian Tchividjian, thanks for being on What We Really Want.
Thanks for having me, man. You said my name perfectly. I'm very impressed.
So we don't have to let that be the first question. Let's let it be this one. Tullian, what do you really want out of our conversation today?
A good conversation about real stuff, real life. I was saying before you started recording that I think the recovery community needs to be more deeply connected. And I, as a result of my own crash and burn nearly 10 years ago, have become deeply connected to the recovery community. And I see pockets of it here and pockets of it there. And I love the pockets that I've been able to be involved in. But to gain more connection within the recovery community. Yeah. And I love what you're doing. I love the work that you do. I love the message in the context of recovery that you are persistently delivering. So when you reached out, it was a no-brainer for me. No-brainer. So I'm happy to be on, and I anticipate that this will be a rich and honest conversation.
Yeah, I may or may not have dropped Steve Brown's name in that. I'm not sure.
That would have been more of a deterrent to me than anything. Just kidding. Steve is one of my very close friends.
Well, that's definitely not getting edited out. So
yeah, no, keep that in there. I think you know this because I shared this with you before, but Steve Brown has known me since I was 6 years old. He's known me entire life. He's an old family friend. He's a former professor of mine in seminary, and he has been a colleague of mine in ministry. So he's the top of the totem pole for me.
Yeah. Well, hey, I've been over the past weekend reading Carnage and Grace, which is a book of yours that just came out a few months ago at the time we're recording this. Full disclosure, I haven't finished it. I'm about halfway through. And so any of my book questions are going to be from the first half. So if you answer any of them in the second half, just be kind and gracious to me. But
so you're making your way through the carnage part and haven't yet reached the grace part.
Well, even in the carnage part, you give us little drops of the grace that's coming and that's there in the midst of it. One thing that you talk about in the chapter that I'm in is the difference between biography and identity. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people know a lot of things about your biography. A lot of people know that you're the grandson of Billy Graham, for example. A lot of people know about your ministry history, especially prior to 2015. What do people not know as much about you personally, like life now, hobbies, interests, things like that? That's
a great question, man. So my wife, Stacy, and I have been married for nearly 8 years. We've been in Jupiter, Florida for the last 5.5 years. We were summoned here by a group of people who were interested in starting a church, which I was not interested in doing at all at the time. And yet here we are 5 years later or so, and we have a recovery place masquerading as a church called the Sanctuary, and it's become my home. It's where my wife and I lead. It's where I preach. The Sanctuary, they are my people. I often say to our people that if the Sanctuary didn't exist, I'm not sure I would go to church. And that has nothing to do whatsoever with whether I believe in God or whether I know I need to hear the gospel. It's not that. Mm-hmm. It's just that there are so few churches in my experience that are like the Sanctuary in the sense that they recognize first and foremost that this is a recovery place for humans. And so that's what occupies most of our time these days. I do writing. You mentioned my book, Carnage and Grace. I finished that maybe a year ago, and it was published a few months ago. That was a laborious work for me. And hobbies, I mean, I'm a gym rat. And I have been for many, many, many years. Got into CrossFit style training probably 5 years ago after we moved to Jupiter. And I've discovered and now know, I'm 51, and I now know that my exercise regimen is just as much for my brain as it is my body. Mm-hmm. I have, there are physical benefits to doing that and being committed to that, but there are also a lot of emotional and mental benefits to that. So if I go 2 days without training, I start becoming impossible to be around. It's that much a part of my life. I am I've been a lover of the beach. I'm from South Florida. I live in South Florida. I've been a lover of the beach and beach culture my entire life. I'm a South Floridian through and through. I love everything about life in South Florida. I'm also an electronic music junkie. I first heard electronic music when I was probably 19 years old at a nightclub in Miami. And when the music came on, I was like, this is the sound I've been looking for my entire life. And as the sound has matured and as I have matured, I've discovered that there's a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence in some of that music. And so I appreciate that. 2 of my 3 kids are also electronic music fans. So when music festivals come to South Florida, which many of them do, especially in Miami, or DJs from around the world come to Miami, my kids are my partners in crime. They go with me. They're old enough now. They're the 2 that go with me are 27 and 22. And so I literally spend a portion of every day searching for new music. Like it is poetry to me. So I believe whenever people's lives go sideways, when people find themselves stuck in unhealthy patterns, and addiction, habitual sin, just whatever that you want to call your experience, it's because we're pursuing a good desire in a broken way. And so we are wanting to try to help people
envision and move toward what they're really looking for, which I believe if you boil it down to one word, it's a word you've already used, which is connection. And a few of the experiences that I think move us towards better connection are humility, honesty, and confession. And in your case, all three of these seem to fit. And I'd love to get into the story of the past decade of your life or so, if that sounds good.
Absolutely, man.
I love that we're talking kind of as I'm in the process of reading Carnage and Grace, in which you make it clear that words matter. So my question is, why are the words that you use when describing your experience so important?
I think one of the reasons they were so important is because we can easily describe the dark moments of our lives, the mistakes that we make, the destruction that we cause in terminology that is too soft. Or maybe we don't realize it, but our soft terminology is a bad concealer for the fact that we still haven't really owned it. So, and there's a plethora of terminology that we could use to soften the blow, so to speak, and to make it sound less severe than it actually was. And for me, messing up was too soft. Now, I don't even know if screwed up is strong enough, to be honest with you. I mean, the destruction that was caused, the destruction that I imposed on other people because of selfish decisions I made during that season in life have lingering effects to this day. So on the one hand, whenever I'm talking to people who have royally screwed up, have tanked their lives, and have affected the people that they love the most, one of the things I like to share with them is that this is not uncommon for the human race. Like, I don't want them to feel like they've screwed up so bad in a way that no one else ever has, and they're beyond the hope of redemption. So I want to identify with them in that way and let them know that the human race has been screwing up royally since Genesis chapter 3 in every imaginable way, in every disgusting, perverse, destructive way. The human race has been screwing up. And I want them to know that there is a solidarity there. They're not alone. But at the same time, we can sometimes use that truth to soften the blow of what we've done, even in subtle ways, kind of describe our circumstances in a way that owns certain things, but then implies that we wouldn't have done those things if other people hadn't have done these things. And I wanted to steer clear of all of that. It took the process of writing this book. So it normally takes me, this is my 8th book, and it has taken me anywhere between 9 to 11 months, maybe 8 to 10 months to write a book. And this one took me nearly 18 months to write. And the reason for that was because this was so personal, and the truths that I was going to be exposing about myself had to be done in such a way that I was confessing my sin and not the sins of other people. I wasn't the only one who sinned in my equation. Everybody around me was also a sinner, but it was their sin, and it's hard to tell your story in a comprehensive way without confessing other people's sins, even if that's not your intention. I don't want to expose them. It's not like I'm trying to out them, but it's so interconnected and so intertwined. It's hard. And so I think that owning it without in any way shifting blame and trying to find that balance was hard to do, but that's what made word choices so important.
Yeah, well, and you did it. Just this is a little bit of an excerpt from the beginning of chapter 5, where you said, as is often the case when we get caught, things get worse before they start to get better. For me, the embarrassing truth is that for a while afterward, I frantically wandered in the wasteland of selfishness that I'd chosen to inhabit. Rather than blaming myself first for all the hurt I caused, I pointed fingers in every direction, including heavenward. I was angry at God and others and doing everything I could to save myself from the wreckage I caused. I was in full self-salvation mode.
Yep. That is an accurate description. of the year that followed my crash and burn. This all went down in late spring, early summer of 2015. And from the summer of 2015 to the summer of 2016, I was frantically trying to repair my image. I was owning enough to make people think that I was sorry and contrite, but I was significantly manipulating the narrative in my favor. It's easy to play humble and much harder to be humbled.
Yeah.
And, I could feign humility with the best of them and feign honesty with the best of them, which is what I did. And some of it was unconscious. That's just, the way the broken human system responds when you're caught, when you're discovered. But some of it was conscious. I mean, some of it was, I was on a mission to get my old life back. And in order to do that, I had to convince enough people that I was sorry and that now I really had something to say because I've gone through so much and all of this gave me street cred and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was just, annoying when you look back.
A question for you about that, because I can resonate with a lot of what you're saying, because I was so excited to not be living with a secret anymore, after my stuff came out in 2009, that I wanted as much or maybe more than enjoying that freedom myself was I wanted everybody else to know about it. This is the question. There is such a joy at this new thing that like it's been experienced somewhat in theory because I wasn't able to fully soak it in, but now I can, and I want everybody to know that. I mean, was any of that going on with you?
Not in that first year because I didn't feel free.
Right.
I mean, like I said, I was still manipulating the narrative. I was spinning the story. I was owning just enough to make people think that I was humble and sorry, but I really wasn't. I was more angry than anything else. Now, there is a sense in which I was extremely sorry and racked with guilt and shame and regret, specifically because of the hurt I caused my 3 children, who at the time were 20, 18, and 13. And so there was a part of me that was extremely sorry. The pain in their eyes were awakening to me. They helped me see just how selfish I had been. These 3 lives that were entrusted into my care. In my case, my first wife and I ended up getting divorced. And so the after effects of that will go on until the day I die.
Sure.
For my 3 kids, for my grandkids, their parents or grandparents aren't married anymore. And now I am the leader of a blended family, which has its own complications. And every time a blended family complication arises, it's a reminder that I screwed up and that I changed the trajectory of my family. And so I'm free in so many ways that I wasn't free before. So many ways. But there are also a lot of ways in which I'm still not free. And I don't think we arrive. In fact, I shared this with a friend of mine the other day that I don't see recovery so much as an arrival as it is an awareness that we become increasingly self-aware. We become increasingly honest about the way life really is rather than the way we want life to be, not just externally, but internally. And so that first year, I didn't feel like I was excited because I had this newfound freedom and now I wanted to share it with people. I was faking a lot of things, things that I was aware of, things that I wasn't aware of. I needed to be set free from a lot of things. Some of those things I was aware of, some of those things I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
So it took me years. I mean, it really took me years. I would say maybe 3-4 years before I could really talk about this stuff with honest integrity and own this stuff and talk openly about it. One of the reasons why it took me 18 months to write Carnage and Grace was because where I was when I started it and where I was when I ended it were 2 totally different places. And in the process, I think it really set me free in new ways.
Wow.
So yeah, now, of course, one of the great joys of life is the freedom to tell the truth about myself, to be honest, to pave the way, so to speak, to go first, like I say in the book.
Yeah.
And hopefully by going first, I create an environment around me where other people feel safe telling the truth about themselves also. And so, yeah, I don't know of a better way, to be honest with you, because I'll have people from time to time go, why do you talk so much about your crash and burn and the failures that you experienced and the consequences that continue to linger? And I always respond by saying, I don't know of a better way to show you the best parts of God without showing you the worst parts of me.
Yeah.
If there's a better way, tell me, I'm all ears. But I think that's where God's grace shines the brightest. Someone sent me a quote today that said, our brokenness doesn't separate us from God's grace. It connects us to God's grace. And I think that is so true and so profound, and something that is, in my opinion, missing in the Christian community these days.
We'll be right back.
How have things gotten so out of control? How did something that didn't seem like such a big deal at first completely take over? Porn and sex addiction are destroying your life and killing your relationships. You know you can't keep going on like this, keeping secrets and telling lies. Something has to change. But how? Most men who struggle with unwanted or addictive sexual behavior have tried to fix it on their own. But sex addiction is powerful and complicated. Recovery is possible, but it isn't easy. It requires us to focus on more than just behavior. It requires us to look at our whole lives and the parts of our stories that contribute to addiction. If you're ready to find freedom, maybe it's time for you to get to the roots. The Roots Retreat is a 4-day therapeutic and spiritual intensive. You'll work with therapists and coaches who specialize in sex addiction and recovery. You'll learn how to take healthy ownership of your behavior. You'll discover how your life experiences set the stage for addiction to develop. You'll see how God factors into your struggle, and you'll learn effective tools for ongoing recovery after the retreat. If you're ready to stop trying what doesn't work, if you're ready to experience real hope, healing, and change, let's get to the roots.
Visit awakenrecovery.com/Roots Retreat or click the Roots Retreat link in show notes. Thinking about what you just said about what was going on in that first year and how much chaos and fog there still was just in how you were processing it. I want to ask you about the Washington Post statement.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So when we're recording this, like this week is the week like 9 years ago that the Coral Ridge resignation was announced and the paper called to ask you for a statement. And you know, in the book, you say we can say and do some damnably regrettable stuff when we're enraged. And I certainly did. And then you put a transcript of the statement that you made, and following that statement, the first thing you say is, out of anger and rage, I outed my wife. If I was going down, she was going down with me. And, you know, in the subsequent paragraph, you talk about the fact that there has been forgiveness and there, you know, you guys have worked that out, which is wonderful. But tell me a little bit. I mean, you've just been talking about why it's important to you to get specific and to tell a lot of the carnage part. Whew, that's a lot, because there are a lot of people who've had a lot of opinions over the last 9 years about that statement.
Oh, yeah, plenty.
The phrase throwing her under the bus has been, I've read, I don't know how many blogs where that's how people described it. You even acknowledge that in the book. I'd just love to hear you talk about that for a few minutes.
It was a terrible time in my family's life. There was about 6 weeks there that was just absolute hell on earth, gut-wrenching hell on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And there were attempts at reconciliation, and, you know, I was the public person and I get caught, and I was so pissed. I mean, I was so angry for a whole host of reasons. Part of it was anger at myself, but that wasn't at the surface so much. It was anger that these people who I had served would out me this way, anger. Just there was so much anger. There was so much blame shifting going on in my own heart. The elders of Coral Ridge showed up to my house on June 18th, 2015 to confront me, which is when I knew it was over.
Mm-hmm.
On June 19th, the next day, 2015, I sat down with my three kids and told them what I had done, that I had been unfaithful to their mother, and they knew that their mother had been unfaithful to me. So their whole world was falling apart. Entire
Wow.
world was falling apart. Like, who are these two people? We
Right.
thought we knew these two people. In
Yeah.
fact, my daughter Jenna, who's now 22, I've asked her over the years, what was the hardest part for you during all that? And she said the hardest part was thinking to myself, I don't know these. These are my parents, and I don't know them. They're not who I thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a really, really hard 6 weeks or so. So June 18th, I'm confronted. June 19th, I confessed to my kids. Which was a Friday. So June 20th, 2015 is when Coral Ridge made their statement that I had resigned due to a moral failure. And within hours of Coral Ridge making that statement, I was getting bombarded.
Of course you were. Yeah.
Newspapers and magazines and all that stuff, news sources. And it was not just Christian news sources, it was non-Christian news sources.
Sure.
And it was because of the platform that I had, because of my family history and all of that stuff. This was big news at the time.
Sure.
And so the Washington Post reached out to me. I was in a hotel room, and they reached out to me and asked for a statement. And I immediately called a guy who had worked with me on PR stuff before. And I said, what do I do with this? So he sent me like a draft that was much better than the one that I then edited it to be. So he sent me a draft that was good. I should have used that one. But I was so mad. I was so mad at my wife at the time that I was like, man, if I'm getting all the attention for my infidelity and nobody knows about yours, that ends today. So I made this statement that I will live to regret for the rest of my life. Of course, her name's Kim. Kim and I have had conversations about, we've had, it's been 9 years. We've had numerous conversations, and, there is a mutual forgiveness and an appreciation for our family and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's all water under the bridge. But at the time, I was just pissed, and I wanted her to feel as much pain as I did. I wanted her to feel as much public vitriol as I was feeling. But that's an embarrassing statement. And I wrestled with whether or not to even include it, because I don't talk about my ex-wife's infidelity in the book at all. And the only place that implies it or talks about it in the smallest way is in that statement, which is why I didn't want to include the statement initially, because I didn't want to talk about her stuff. I wanted to talk about my stuff. But it was public. Everybody read it. Like you said, so many people had an opinion about it. So to not talk about it in the book, to me, felt like it was disingenuous. Like, I've got to talk about this. I'll probably get hammered by people if I don't talk about it. And I want to talk about it in such a way that I communicate my disgust with that statement now when I look back, that I was just an angry, vengeful guy who was pissed at the world. Yeah, that was a bad, bad, bad moment in my life.
Well, and it happened at a time, the last 10 years, getting more progressively so, has been just a season where in the world, anybody and everybody can and does share their opinions on social media platforms and otherwise, mostly on social media platforms, because we can just pull the pin, throw the grenade, and not have to look the person in the face. And so, like, there's never a good time to be going through something like that. but like in the age of pervasive social media, just awful. And one thing I've just been thinking about and want to ask you about, something that I say to a lot of people in recovery. So people that are crawling out of the crater, they're in the first week or two. And a lot of times they are feeling like a desire to just tell everybody what's going on, right? Because I've been lying, keeping secrets for so many years. I love telling the truth. I want to tell everything to everybody. And usually we say, hey, that's great that you have that desire. And it's really wonderful to have one or two people in your life that get the whole story. You know, your spouse, your therapist, maybe a trusted friend. But we really advise people to be careful about sharing all the details with too many people, because you can always tell people more, but you can never tell them less. And once it's out there, it's out there. And so the reason we tell them that is because not everybody can be trusted to steward your story and to carry that part of it with you. And so I see some of the things that people post on your X feed, and it seems like in choosing to put it all out there, you had to know some of what was going to come to you with that. Is there any part of being so open with your story that you wish you hadn't done, or is it worth it?
Not in this particular case. I think I set out to write a book that was true to how things happened. Of course, details were left out. In fact, I say this in the introduction that this is a memoir. A memoir is a snapshot of a season in life. An autobiography or a biography is the story of a person's life from birth to death. But a memoir is a snapshot of a particular season in my life. And even within that season, it's impossible to recollect every detail. Impossible.
Of course.
And it would be a huge mistake to even try, because that would make for a 3,000-page book that would be, dense and incredibly boring to read. So to sort of paint an accurate picture of what I was like during that time, and then to show the aftermath of that and the places where God met me in detail, I thought that was very important. But in terms of the telling of my story, there are things that I feel I missed, like, oh, I wish I would have included that.
Mm-hmm.
I had planned my own suicide legitimately in the summer of 2016, to the point of writing out my suicide letter and planning how I was going to do it and when I was going to do it. And the story of how that ended up getting interrupted is a beautiful story, but that part's not in the book. I've shared that in other places, and I've posted on that before on social media, but I didn't put that in the book. And I'm like, I wish I would have, because that would give hope to a lot of people. But, you're right. I anticipated that there would be a lot of pushback. My mom and Steve Brown, by the way.
Yeah, Steve told me that he asked you not to wait till you were dead to release it.
Yes, he did. I had some
But then he read it, right? And then he changed his mind.
I sent it to him.
Yeah.
He said that to me before he had read it.
Yeah.
And then after I sent it to him and he read it, he said, okay, it's good. But my mom got a hold of him, and she was super fearful that, it's been almost a decade now, and she was fearful that the publishing of this book would rehash everything and all the haters and all the vitriol.
She's like, what are you doing?
Really quiet. Yeah, that's been really quiet for a long time, would come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it, to be honest with you, it hasn't. I mean, I've gotten a little bit here and a little bit there, but nothing near to what I expected. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think some of it's just, dude, it's been almost a decade. And the truth that I tell about myself in the book is undisputable.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. I guess it would be indisputable, not undisputable, but it's honest. It's true. And so I'm glad that it's out there. Like I said, I thought there would be a lot more pushback than there.
Well, it kind of makes sense to me why it's been on the low side, because when you anticipate or just know any criticism that anybody could throw at you and you put it on yourself first, you're kind of taking their ammo away. Yeah. And it kind of takes all the fun out of it, because whatever they could say, you've already said.
There was a guy who made a derogatory post on something that I had I don't remember what it was that I posted, but this guy said something like, wasn't this the reason you were ousted from Coral Ridge? It was a shot. It wasn't like a genuine, sincere question. It was, isn't this the guy that cheated on his wife, was unfaithful to his wife multiple times, and as a result got kicked out from this famous church? And I was tempted to just delete the comment. And I was like, no, this is a good object lesson for any observer. And I just said, yeah, I cheated on my first wife back in 2015, and I rightfully lost my job over it. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah.
And the whole point was, when you really own your stuff, there's no place left for them to go. It's Steve Brown has this way of responding to his critics. He calls it the bingo retort. And basically, anytime someone comes in and says, "Man, you're egotistical and you're brash and you're, whatever," and they mean it as an attack, he looks at them and just says, "Bingo."
Bingo.
Like, yeah, that's just a small part of it. If you knew me the way God knows me, you'd know that I'm a lot worse than all those things.
Yes.
So I think there is a tremendous amount of freedom in owning the worst parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And part of that freedom is that there's nothing else they can say.
Yeah. I think Steve calls it kissing the demon on the lips, right?
Yes, he does. He uses that phrase too, and he's right. Yeah.
I want to ask you about just the choice and to put the stuff out there, and as it relates to just motivation and kind of we've been talking about the what. I want to ask you a little bit about the why, because early in the book, when you're describing what you call the hedonic treadmill that you were on, where no matter what you had, you were always looking for more. One of the phrases that you used was wanting to be known and loved and affirmed in a way that you felt that you weren't experiencing in life and in marriage at that point. So here's my question. Do you ever struggle now with trusting your own motives? Like even the motivation for writing a book like Carnage and Grace, because there's honesty that says, "Hey, I'm tired of lying and hiding and minimizing." And then there's honesty like, "Hey, look at how honest and vulnerable I'm being," and I've done both. And so how do you know that what you're doing is healing and healthy versus being done in an attempt to get people to like you?
I know my motives weren't pure in writing this book. And the reason I can say that is because I haven't had a pure motive since the moment I was born. It's impossible, in my opinion, to have a pure motive. I think our motives are mixed all the time.
At best, right?
There's always some look at me and always some look at God. If any of us wait until we have deceived ourselves enough to believe that we're operating with pure motives, we'll never do anything. So I go, you know what? My posture on that is own the fact that I'm a mixed bag and just do the work and trust God to work out the details in terms of who it reaches, how it reaches people. Yes, my hope was that this book would be healing to people, but I really set out simply to be honest. And some of that honesty is an admission that, I'm sure that my motives for even writing this book or for even telling this story are mixed. I know they are. There's no question that they are.
Yeah.
And anybody who would, try to argue that their particular motives for preaching a sermon, starting a podcast, writing a book, loving their kids even, loving their spouse even, anybody who would try to argue that they are even capable of doing anything with a pure motive, I think it's just diluted.
Well, I love that you're saying that. It's reminding me of the first time that I was ever asked to publicly share my story after everything had blown up. So everything hit the fan for me in January of 2009. So this was October of 2009. And a buddy of mine who is pastoring in the Houston area asked me to come speak at a joint men's breakfast with 7 churches, and 120 guys were there. And I find myself 10 minutes from going on to share my story, and the pervasive thoughts in my head were, man, I hope they're impressed with this. I hope they like me. This is going to be a story like they've never heard before. I'm like, who are you? Yeah. Where is this coming from? Because it didn't feel like they were self-conjured thoughts. And, so one of the early episodes, episode 5, was with my pastor, and he was talking about shame and the lies of the enemy. And he said that one of the ways that the enemy makes it a double shame is by giving you the thought and then making you think it was your own thought. And so how could I even think things like that? Very
C.S. Lewis-ish.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I called a guy who was really helping. He wasn't my sponsor, but he was kind of functioning largely in a role like that. And I said, look, this is what's going on. I'm about to speak. What do I do? He says, well, just tell him that.
Yes.
He's like, tell them that
Yes.
I'm about to get up and share the most horrible things I've ever done. And the leading thought in my head is, are they going to like me? But that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yes. And to be honest with you, that's not going away in this life. We will not. That's why I like to talk about the fact that we are in recovery rather than the fact that we have recovered. We are in recovery until the day we die.
Yeah.
Full recovery is not for this life. It's for the next one. So we will be dealing with mixed motives the rest of our lives. If I were to wait until I felt like my motives were all for God and his glory and they were pure, I would never preach another sermon in my life if I were being honest with myself, because I would have to conclude my motives aren't pure. I say this very openly as a way of disclosing my own internal dysfunction, is that even when I'm preparing, and I work hard to prepare sermons and to preach sermons, and part of the motivation, I'm sure, even though I'm not immediately conscious of it, is I need you to think I'm a good speaker if I'm going to feel like I matter. My gosh, it's the motive behind almost everything we do, no matter what. Like I said, even the seemingly selfless act of loving our children, or in my case, even loving my 3 grandchildren, or in loving my wife, or in calling my mom to check in with her, whatever the case may be. All of those actions take place with mixed motive.
Well, and admitting that it's mixed in there can help us give ourselves a daggum break, right? And
absolutely.
And I even, as you were describing that, I mean, I was thinking, I know myself well enough to know that I have had a sense through my life of feeling important if somebody that others see as important thinks I'm important, So like somebody on the podcast whose name is very recognizable, if I'm not careful, that can be why I'm doing this. Yeah. And instead of the substance of what you've been through and what that's going to be able to do for people as they hear your story. And it takes me, as you were talking, I was thinking about that and about what John the Baptist said in John 3, he must increase, I must decrease. I mean, that there's not a day when that process is over, at least not while we're breathing air on this planet.
No, there's not, which is why I so appreciate Martin Luther. My historical hero is Martin Luther. He described a theology of the cross as calling a thing what it is. Don't be an idealist, be a realist. In other words, call things what they are. And the fact of the matter is, we are all and always a mixed bag. Never going away, not in this life anyway. That's a promise reserved for the next life. So everything I do, like I said, from writing a book to preaching a sermon to telling my daughter I love her, is all done with mixed motives. Always. Someone respectfully asked me to search my motives for making the posts I've made about cussing, wondering if I may be doing it for likes and clicks and attention. I'm sure my motives are mixed. They always are. I've never had a pure motive in my life. No one has. A little bit of me, a little bit of God, a little bit of look at me, a little bit of look at God. That's our lot in this life as broken people. Just acknowledge it and press on. Go about your life. And
hopefully over time, see the ratio change.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Speaking of calling things for what they are, I want to pivot a little bit. You said something about how you just really want to see the church embody more of the things that we typically see in a recovery community. And some of the things that keep that from happening, you talk about in the book as well. You and I both know what it's like to serve in pastoral ministry with a secret. And you say it's one thing to admit you're a sinner. It's another thing altogether to admit your sin. Yeah. You say in the book, we like our leaders to admit screwed upness in theory, but screwed upness in practice, that's a different animal.
Yes.
But when you have a pastor who says, hey, this is something that I am currently struggling with, and it's specific, that makes people all kinds of squidgy, and talk to me, if you would, a little bit about just what you have observed in the church that you would love to see change or blow up or whatever, become more in submission to God's leading, to make it the kind of place that people find in a recovery community. How does it why is it not happening, Tullian, and how does it start to happen more?
Oh boy, that is a big question.
Yeah.
That would require probably 2 podcasts to answer, but this is heart-wrenching to me. But the church should be the safest place for broken people to break things and for fallen people to fall down. And instead of it being the safest place, it is more often than not the scariest place, which is why you'll have people say to you at Awaken meetings, this is my church. Not because it is, but because that is what they're longing for from the church.
Yeah.
And that is what the church ought to be. So
let me ask you this, if I could jump in for a second. Being a safe place doesn't necessarily mean that anybody who's serving in staff leadership can do anything and keep their job. You know, it's an important distinction to say that safety doesn't equal unconditional job security, because the church is different from some jobs where you can't be fired for certain things.
Right.
And we've got to understand that. But what would it look like to say, hey, we want to create a culture where you can come and say, this is what's going on. Our immediate reaction or response is going to be, how can we give you and your loved ones what you need? How can we come around you and support you? You may or may not get to keep your job.
Yeah.
But that's not ultimately the most important thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've seen it done very well where, for instance, somebody on staff comes to whoever their superior is or their board of directors, whatever the case may be, whatever the church governance structure is, and essentially says, guys, I have something I need to share with you. And they disclose whatever that may be. I'm stuck in an emotional affair, or I'm having a physical affair, or I'm gay and I know how you guys view those things, or whatever the case may be. And for the church, what often happens is, because the church is so self-protective and they're afraid of the ramifications of what might happen to the church, they cut these guys loose and take their stuff out to the curb and act as if they never existed. I've seen this around the world over and over and over again. And I saw it with my own life.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way it went down with me. And the way I've seen it done well, someone comes in, they feel the freedom to share that, and they say, okay, listen, we obviously you can't continue to serve on staff any more than Peyton Manning can stay in the game after he breaks his leg. Okay, you need to be sidelined. Now, whether you rehab enough to ever come back in the game or not, that's a different story for a different time. Right now, we are going to surround you, and we're not going to disclose details to the whole congregation. That's not their business. You have come to us and you have trusted us with this information. Our first mission is to get healing for you and your family. Even to say, obviously you can't keep your job, but what happens is these guys end up getting thrown out, and now they don't even have the time or the energy to spend on recovery because they got to find a job.
Right.
I mean, they literally have to find a way to pay the bills.
So it's almost like the first thing that we're going to do for you is to let you know that it was a good idea for you to tell us, because we're going to honor that honesty by providing care.
Providing care. And that care means for the next 6 months. We can't do this indefinitely. And the process as we go along will dictate how we handle it the next step. But we want you for right now. You don't need to worry about finding a job, another job. You cannot continue to be on staff in your current role. And I've done this before. You can't serve on staff right now. You've injured yourself and other people. But this guy over here who owns this business or owns this company is going to hire you. He's already agreed to do it so that you don't have to worry about work. We want you to think first and foremost about your mental, spiritual, emotional health along with your families. So I've told people for years now, every time I see a pastor fall, every time I tell people, I wish I was independently wealthy with $20 million sitting in the bank. I would literally hire every single one of these guys, all of them. And I would give them zero responsibilities for 12 months. I would just say, come and heal, and we will pay you a salary. just so you don't have to worry about that, because that need becomes primary, understandably so. I mean, we can't get our house foreclosed on. My kids need to stay in school. And so, I think I've seen it done well. It's not often that I see it do well. More often than not, it's sort of wash your hands of the person and take them out to the curb with all of their stuff. But in terms of sort of how can the church become more of a recovery place than it is now, I'll say two things about that. The first thing is, I don't think it ever will be. I mean, that not because I don't want it to be. I could be wrong. And it's not that I'm pessimistic, and it's not that I'm optimistic. I have enough data to look at it and be realistic and to see how things trend. We have built such an industry, a massive industry with an accompanying culture that would have to be so systematically dismantled. I mean, nuked, absolutely nuked, where there is nothing left at all of what has been, in order for the church to function more as a recovery place. In the same sense that the gospel has never been super popular. I mean, it hasn't. The religious community crucified Jesus. The religious community crucified basically all the disciples. In Martin Luther's day, he was excommunicated, assassination attempts. I mean, any place where grace has been distributed in its purest fashion, in its purest form, the religious community has rejected it. And so I don't think that the church is ever going, on a universal level, is ever going to feel like the recovery place it was intended to be. That being said, where you do find churches that feel like recovery places, it always starts at the top. Always. It always starts with the leader of that organization. You can have a plurality of leaders in the church, but there is the one face of the organization. I don't care what people say, good, bad, indifferent. There is the one face of the organization. And that means that the guy behind the pulpit needs to be the guy to go first. And yes, it's scary. Yes, it's unnerving. Yeah, especially if you're in a church setting that has never had a leader like that. In my case, we started the sanctuary on this premise. So I started out that way, which means that, religious people who come through our doors usually last about a week, and then they go back to their churches, but the broken down people find their way. So we're attracting people who want the guy behind the pulpit to go first. So in that sense, my job's easier than the guy who has this awakening. He's in a Baptist church somewhere in Mississippi or somewhere in Alabama or Texas or whatever, and goes, oh my gosh, like the culture of my church needs to change, and I need to be the one to go first. Because more than likely, he won't have the freedom to do that. But it's worth it if you can sort of wait out the storm, and if you last to the other side, because the culture that will be created by a leader that goes first is like heaven on earth. I mean, it's just, I have a group of guys, we call it the Vault. We meet every Thursday night. We all sit in a circle. We introduce ourselves. If we want to say something, we do. If we don't want to say something, we don't. No one's obligated to say anything. There's no pressure at all. No one's giving advice. No one's counseling. No one's judging. And there's none of that going on. But everyone goes around the room, and if they do want to speak, they identify a current struggle and a current win, or something that feels like a win. Yeah. And we do that on purpose, because even when life is at its worst, God is still at work, and learning to see where those places are can be super helpful in the journey to recovery.
That's really good. Yeah.
But I go, and I'm not there to facilitate. I'm not there to lead the group. I go and I open up wide to these guys. I mean, if my wife and I are having a bad day or a bad week, or I'm stressed about one of my kids, or I'm frustrated at the nature of my blended family and the tensions that exist, they're gonna hear about it. They're gonna hear about it. And I'll tell you what, the fact, I know that everybody, when I was in seminary, of course, we were told pastors need a group of guys that they can meet with and talk with and be open with. But the assumption and the implication was always, find those people outside of your church, because you need a safe place to go. which I understand. But for me to have that group inside my church and I'm the pastor, I mean, it is a gift, and it's all owing to leading by going first in the truth-telling department. Tell the truth about yourself, and the people that don't want to hear it will be weeded out, and the people who need to hear it will be weaved in. But so that's a very long answer to your question.
Well, it leads me to another one that just popped into my head. So you talked about the fact that the sanctuary was kind of founded on that principle, that desire, that approach. Even so, and even with your last 10 years of life, having as many publicly known crashes, and the fact that you've chosen to speak about it so openly, do you ever feel the fear rise up in you, or is that something that's not very present anymore? Like, does it still kind of come out of nowhere and surprise you sometimes, like an apprehension? Is it really okay to say this? Or is that, yeah?
Yeah, it does. In fact, I was preaching a sermon recently where I read something that I had never read out loud before in a public setting. In fact, it's in the book, but I didn't read it from the book. It's about the afternoon I sat down and told my 3 kids that I had cheated on their mom. And it's a very heart-wrenching, it was an incredibly heart-wrenching thing to write when I wrote that years ago. And it's an incredibly heart-wrenching thing for me to read, even if I'm just reading it to myself. And so recently I read it publicly, and all 3 of my kids were present. Now, they've heard this, they know this is not news to them. They know that their dad's an open book, and we've had these conversations privately, all that stuff. But I mean, I woke up, I had prepared the message on Saturday, woke up on Sunday morning, and I came so close to taking it out, so close. And there were a few reasons for that. One was, I don't want my kids to think I'm always talking about this, because I'm not, but I don't want them to think I'm always talking about this. The other reason was because, it's hard. It's hard to get up and talk about these things. It's embarrassing, especially when I'm standing in front of a group of people. Let's say I'm guest speaking at an event, or I'm guest preaching at a church or something like that. And people are just becoming familiar with me now, or I am now making my first impression on these people. And I lead with my story in terms of cheating on my first wife and getting caught and what it cost me and a lot of other people. It's never fun. I don't like it. I don't get pleasure from it. It's always very difficult for me to do. But, like I said earlier, I haven't come up with a better way to show people the best parts of God without showing them the worst parts of me. And I think something you said earlier, which I didn't get a chance to address, which I think is exactly right. When you tell these guys who are finally free from all these secrets and the lies, and they want to tell everybody, and your caution to them about that. So wise. That's just incredibly wise counsel, because that is a temptation. Like, I'm finally free. I don't care what other people think about me anymore. I know, in my case, I'm unconditionally loved by God, which means I don't need everybody else to like me, which means I can be more honest with everybody around me. I always look at it in terms of concentric circles. Like you said, there should be a few people that you tell everything to.
Yeah.
And then there are more people that you say a lot of things to. And then there are more people that you say some things to, and I think that treating it that way is loving to other people, because you don't just want to assume vomiting may make you feel better, but nobody likes to be thrown up on.
Yes.
And so
but there are some who are willing to be thrown up on.
Yes. And those are your inner circle. Yep. Those are the people in your inner circle that are like, your vomit doesn't bother me. Go ahead. But I think the way you phrased it was really good, that when we're that open with everybody. Now, in each of the concentric circles, we're telling the truth.
Yes.
It's not like we're being dishonest. Larry Crabb used to make a distinction between being totally honest and totally open.
Yes.
Which I think is a very helpful distinction.
My counselor did the same thing for Stacy and me.
But I think that's extremely wise, because you don't want to just tell everybody everything. That's not loving to them. But at the same time, you need to tell some people everything.
Yes.
And those people have to be chosen very carefully and very meticulously, because it is a burden that you're putting on somebody, and they have to be strong enough and grounded enough to carry it without being crushed by it.
Yeah, that's well said. And my prayer is that people who are needing to find those people and they don't know who they are, they don't know if those people are already in their lives or not, will discover the ones that are, or meet the ones, if they haven't met them yet. Because this is, so much of what causes our crash is trying to do it alone, right?
That's exactly right.
Believing that we have to. And to come to discover that being interdependent on others is not a character defect, that's the character design. Like, that's God's design, is that we need other people and that we experience Him through other people. And so I love the way that you've shared how you found that, and how leaders can really let others know that it's okay for them to seek it out and to ask for it.
Yeah. And thankfully I had a few of those people in my life at the time. I lost a lot of friends during that season, but there were a couple. Steve was one of them. A friend of mine named Paul Zoll was another. A friend of mine named Pat Thurmer, who was another. And they're talked about openly in the book. But those people specifically, when I was at my worst, never blinked. They never bailed. They understood the human condition well enough to not be surprised by what I was doing or how I was acting or what was going on with me. My friend Pat Thurmer, who is recently retired within the last couple of years, he was a pastor of a small Lutheran church on the southwest coast of Florida, took me in really to his church, and they cared for us and they oversaw our care. And it was just, they were beautiful. Pat is incredibly wise. And he said to me when everything fell apart, he said, I've been in the church for 60 something years. And he said, for 60 something years, I have been disappointed with the way churches and church cultures handle real sin in the camp. And he said, it boggles my mind that the one institution that, at least theoretically in this world, still believes in original sin is still so shocked when they encounter it. Paul Zoll was very similar. He understood the human condition well enough to understand that things were going to get worse before they got better. So as things got worse, he wasn't surprised. To have those people in your camp and in your life, those non-blinking friends, I call them, people who you feel so safe to share your darkest secrets and struggles with, the greatest gift of grace. Yeah, I'm very grateful for them. Don't know where I would be without them. And so we all need those. We all need the Steve Browns and the Pat Thurmers and the Paul Zolls in our life.
Amen. Tullian, I'm going to hand over the controls. You're about to land this plane here. In the spirit of, let me explain. No, it's too much. Let me sum up. If you were to sum up all the things that you've been encouraging us to think about, and what's behind your choice to share your story at this season of your life, into something that you just want people who are listening right now to take out of this podcast with them for the rest of the day, what would it be?
Man, that's a big question. I would probably say increased self-awareness is the pathway to freedom. And so I long for the Christian community in particular, but the human community at large, to become increasingly self-aware, because down the pathway of self-awareness resides just a sanctuary of freedom that we all long for. And so many of us conceal the worst parts of ourselves because we think that to reveal the worst parts of ourselves will rob us of freedom. And it's a lie. It's not true. When you can finally, and in my case as a Christian, for me to be able to conclude that I am free enough now to be rejected by others because I know in my heart I'll never be rejected by God. And I've tempted him to leave me many times, and he sticks and he stays. To know that I am loved by God unconditionally sets me free from needing everybody else to like me. And when you don't need everybody else to like you, you become a little bit more unedited. You become a little bit more honest with yourself and with others about yourself. And the freedom that you experience when you get to that place is intoxicating in all of the right ways.
Well, let's hop on that path to freedom and hope, man. Thank you so much,
absolutely.
Tullian, Tchividjian. Thank you for sharing so much of your afternoon with me. Thanks for the conversation. I know it's going to be something that's going to give a lot of encouragement and a lot of provocation to think, which is what we want, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for letting me ramble and ramble and ramble.
Hey, love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, feedback, topics you'd like to hear us talk about on the show, click the Send Us a Message link in the show notes of any episode.